It can feel strange to pair the idea of review with the chaos of incident work because most people assume you either know what to do or you do not, and the incident will expose the truth. The reality is that high-pressure response is not a pure test of knowledge because stress changes how memory works, how attention works, and how people communicate. Skills that seem obvious during calm study time can disappear when alarms are firing and leaders are asking questions. Spaced retrieval is a learning approach that trains your brain to pull information out on demand, repeatedly, over time, so that it is available even when pressure is high. Instead of rereading notes and hoping you remember, you practice recalling key ideas from memory, notice what you missed, and then you return to them later. The big goal here is not to become a walking encyclopedia, but to become dependable, meaning you can recall the right concepts and the right language quickly when it matters most. Spaced retrieval starts with a simple insight. The act of remembering strengthens memory more than the act of rereading. When you passively review, your brain recognizes words and feels familiar, but familiarity is not the same as recall. Under stress, you need recall because you cannot count on time, calmness, or perfect prompts. Retrieval practice forces you to create your own prompts, like asking yourself what the first safe communication step is when an incident begins, or what makes a statement too specific for a broad audience. When you attempt an answer and struggle, that struggle is not failure. It is the work that makes the memory stronger. Spacing matters because the brain forgets over time, and retrieving after some forgetting has occurred builds a more durable pathway than retrieving immediately after you studied. Over time, you are training for reliability, which is exactly what incident work demands. Assessment in this context is not about grades or shame. It is about spotting weak links before the incident finds them for you. A beginner-friendly way to assess is to use short recall checks that focus on decisions, language, and priorities. You might ask yourself to explain, in your own words, how to provide an update without leaking sensitive details, or how to describe uncertainty without sounding evasive. You might practice distinguishing between confirmed facts and suspected possibilities, because that distinction collapses easily under stress. You might also assess your understanding of roles, such as who should speak externally, who should brief leaders, and who should coordinate technical actions. The assessment should feel like a mirror, not a judgment. If you discover you keep mixing up terms like impact and cause, that is valuable information because it tells you what will likely go wrong when the pressure is real. To make assessment useful, you need to tie it to realistic pressure cues without turning it into a drama. Pressure cues include urgency, interruption, and competing demands for attention. For example, you can practice answering a question in 1 minute, because leaders often need a fast update. You can practice answering the same question 2 different ways, once for a technical team and once for a non-technical leader, because audience differences matter. You can also practice answering while deliberately distracted, like after doing another task, because incidents rarely allow you to focus on one thing at a time. The point is not to simulate panic. It is to teach your brain that you can still retrieve core principles even when conditions are imperfect. This kind of assessment helps you notice whether you only understand an idea when you have time to think, or whether you can access it quickly enough to be useful. Tracking is the partner of assessment, because learning that is not tracked tends to drift into wishful thinking. Tracking does not need fancy tools or complicated scoring, but it does need consistency. You can track which concepts you recalled smoothly, which ones required hints, and which ones you missed entirely. You can also track whether your explanations were clear and stable or whether they changed each time you tried, because unstable explanations often signal weak understanding. For communication under pressure, tracking should include language accuracy, such as whether you avoided turning assumptions into facts, whether you used consistent terminology, and whether you kept statements bounded to what the audience needed. Over time, you want to see the number of weak spots shrink and the speed of recall improve. Tracking is also motivating because it shows progress in a concrete way, and that progress becomes confidence that is grounded in practice rather than in hope. It helps to think of tracking as building a personal reliability map, showing which topics are dependable and which are fragile. In incident communication, fragile areas often include the urge to overshare, the urge to label the incident type too early, and the urge to provide certainty when you only have partial evidence. If you track your practice answers, you may notice patterns, like always using strong words such as compromise before you can justify them. That pattern is exactly what an incident will amplify because stress pushes people toward blunt, fast language. Tracking can also reveal gaps in role clarity, like forgetting who owns external updates, or forgetting why using uncontrolled channels can create new risk. When you spot a fragile area, you can schedule it for more frequent retrieval practice until it becomes stable. The idea is to reduce surprises, because surprise is the enemy of calm, and calm is the friend of careful communication. Spaced retrieval becomes more powerful when you link it to the way incident work actually unfolds, including briefings and updates that change over time. One day you might practice the first briefing, where facts are limited and the goal is alignment. Another day you might practice a mid-incident update, where containment is underway and questions are sharper. Another day you might practice a late incident message, where recovery and next steps matter more than immediate triage. This variety trains flexibility, because the same core principles apply, but the emphasis shifts with the situation. You also learn to keep language consistent even as details evolve, which is one of the hardest skills under stress. In other words, you are not memorizing scripts. You are practicing stable thinking patterns. When the incident changes shape, your thinking stays steady, and your messages stay safe and useful. A key target for retrieval practice is terminology, because words are the handles people use to carry meaning. Under pressure, teams often drift into mixed language, where different people describe the same thing with different terms, and that creates confusion. Practice can include recalling the difference between an observed event and an incident that requires response, or the difference between confirmed impact and suspected cause. You can practice explaining why language like safe is risky when the investigation is still developing, and what alternatives communicate progress without making promises. You can also practice naming uncertainty cleanly, using phrases that separate what is confirmed from what is being assessed. This practice matters because terminology is not about sounding professional. It is about ensuring that listeners build the same mental picture from the same words. When everyone's picture matches, decisions get faster and mistakes drop. Communication under pressure also depends on audience targeting, so retrieval practice should include rapid audience switching. If a leader asks for a status update, you should be able to recall the core elements that matter to them, like impact, current actions, decision points, and next update timing. If a technical lead asks for coordination details, you should be able to recall what information supports safe action without leaking unnecessary sensitive details. If a customer-facing team needs guidance, you should be able to recall how to give stable, approved language without speculating. Practicing these switches trains a skill that is easy to underestimate, translating without distorting. Under stress, people either over-translate into vague statements or under-translate into jargon. Retrieval practice can help you stay in the middle, where the message is clear, accurate, and matched to what the listener needs to do next. Another thing to practice retrieving is the idea of communication boundaries, because boundaries are easiest to break when emotions rise. You can test yourself by recalling what you should never include in broad updates, such as system names, investigative methods, or unverified attacker claims. You can practice recalling why channel choice matters, especially if you suspect normal communication tools could be compromised. You can also practice recalling the difference between internal notes and official updates, because the tone and detail level should differ. Boundaries are not only rules, they are guardrails that protect you from the natural human impulse to explain. Under stress, explaining feels like helping, but explaining can leak sensitive incident data or lock you into a story that later changes. Retrieval practice makes boundaries automatic, so you do not have to invent caution in the moment. Because incidents involve coordination, it is also useful to practice retrieving role expectations and handoffs. You should be able to recall who owns the narrative, who approves external messages, and how technical findings flow into leadership briefings. You should be able to recall why too many voices create contradictions and why contradictions create a rumor engine that distracts responders. You can also practice retrieving the idea of a steady update cadence, because cadence reduces panic and reduces constant interruptions. Under pressure, people often abandon cadence and respond to whoever shouts loudest, which fragments the story and wastes time. Retrieval practice can make cadence feel natural, like a heartbeat that keeps the response organized. Even if the content of an update is small, the act of delivering it consistently can stabilize the environment and help everyone focus on what matters. It is important to recognize that retrieval practice is not only for individuals. It supports team consistency too, even if you practice alone. When you train yourself to use stable language, you become a stabilizing node in the team's communication network. That matters because teams under stress often copy the language of whoever sounds confident. If the confident person is using sloppy terminology, the whole team drifts. If the confident person is using careful terminology, the whole team becomes safer. This is one reason spaced retrieval pairs well with incident work. It builds a kind of quiet leadership through clarity. You are not trying to dominate conversations. You are trying to keep meaning intact. Over time, your practice turns into a habit of speaking in evidence-first language, separating facts from hypotheses, and choosing words that guide action instead of triggering panic. A simple way to keep spaced retrieval honest is to include deliberate error checking, where you compare your recalled answer to a trusted reference and identify what was missing or wrong. The value is not in the reference itself. It is in the correction step, because correction rewires the memory. If you consistently forget a concept, like why you should avoid labeling an incident type too early, you can shorten the spacing for that concept and practice it more frequently. If you recall correctly but slowly, you can keep the spacing but add timed prompts to build speed. Tracking these outcomes turns practice into a feedback loop rather than a routine. Under pressure, speed without accuracy is dangerous, but accuracy without speed can also fail because decisions cannot wait. Spaced retrieval is one of the few methods that can build both because it repeatedly demands accurate recall and gradually makes that recall faster. As you build confidence, you can practice retrieving not only facts, but also calm phrasing, because phrasing is what you actually use in the moment. Calm phrasing includes sentences that acknowledge concern without inflating it, sentences that commit to actions rather than to conclusions, and sentences that set expectations about timing. Under stress, people sometimes speak in fragments, or they pile on details, or they sound defensive, and those patterns can erode trust. Practicing a few stable ways to express uncertainty can keep you from falling into those traps. For example, you can practice saying what is confirmed, what is being assessed, and what is being done in a consistent order because structure reduces mental load. You are not memorizing a script. You are building a groove that your brain can follow when your attention is split. That groove becomes a protective factor for the whole response. The point of this review is to connect learning mechanics to incident outcomes in a way that feels practical and real. Assessment tells you what you can recall reliably. Tracking shows you how that reliability changes over time, and spaced retrieval is the method that turns weak recall into strong recall through repeated, timed effort. When you apply it to communications under pressure, you are training to protect meaning, protect boundaries, and protect decision-making when your brain would rather rush. Over time, you will notice that you can give clearer briefings, more stable updates, and more consistent terminology even when the situation is tense. That improvement does not come from talent or luck. It comes from repeated retrieval that makes the right ideas available at the right time. If you treat communication as a control surface in incident work, then practicing it with spaced retrieval is a way of hardening that control surface. It is one of the simplest ways to become steadier, safer, and more useful when the pressure is highest. 123,456.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.